This is Green Street, the environmental health show, greenstreetnews.org, Patti and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of experts who join us every week to talk about what's happening in the world of environmental health and what you need to know to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy. Welcome back. When you sit down to have dinner, do you think about where the food on your plate came from? I mean, before it became that stir fry or that lasagna or that hamburger with lettuce and tomato, somebody somewhere had to get up every morning and make sure that that plant had enough water and the right nutrients, or that animal had the right amount of food and water, and that person was a farmer. Today on Green Street, we're going to talk with Jennifer Fahy, the Communications Director for Farm Aid. That's the nonprofit started by Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp. And she has some important things to say about the food we eat, where it comes from, and how we can all help small farmers. That's coming up in just a few minutes here on Green Street, but first, some of the news items that made their way to our desktops. Patti, what have you got for us this week?
Well, it looks as if New York City firefighters will finally be getting turnout gear that doesn't contain PFAS or forever chemicals that can cause cancer, thanks to legislation pending in the City Council right now.
That sounds like good news.
Yep. Turnout gear, which includes jackets, pants, boots, gloves, and other protective equipment that firefighters wear, is usually treated heavily with PFAS, making it resistant to water and heat and helping the textiles breathe. But occupational cancer is the leading killer of firefighters now nationwide. And the regular exposure to the highly toxic PFAS is thought to be responsible.
Boy.
The International Association of Firefighters, or IAFF, estimates cancer from turnout gear accounted for 66% of firefighter deaths from 2002 to 2019.
Gee whiz, 2/3 of all the deaths related directly to the firefighting gear.
Correct. PFAS are a class of about 16,000 chemicals typically used to make products that resist water, stains, and heat. They are called forever chemicals because they do not naturally break down and they can accumulate in humans and in the environment. The compounds are linked to cancer, kidney disease, liver problems, immune disorders, birth defects, and other serious health problems.
Not something you want to be wearing.
No, I mean, their entire body. I mean,
Completely covered.
every garment that they're wearing, even the undergarments, are treated. State efforts to move to PFAS-free gear have been fiercely opposed by the American Chemistry Council, the trade group that represents PFAS producers, and the turnout gear industry. According to the group, the bans may have unintended consequences. However, the tide may be fully turning against the chemical makers.
I don't know how the American Chemistry Council gets away with, saying, oh, there's going to be unintended consequences. I mean, there may be. But
all the American Chemistry Council is
cost.
supposed to do is to protect manufacturers' bottom line.
And the cost to these firefighters.
Yeah, and they're being exposed to cancer-causing chemicals.
And
they're dying from it.
66% of the deaths.
66%.
Holy
It used to be that firefighters' number one occupational hazard was heart attacks. No longer. It's cancer.
Wow. Well, I have an article here from CBS News that says a new study shows that children who have smartphones by the age of 12 are at an increased risk of health problems. The study published in the journal Pediatrics found that owning a smartphone during early adolescence is associated with increased risks of mental health issues and obesity. As far as psychological impacts, it pinpointed higher incidences of depression and insufficient sleep among children who owned smartphones by ages 12 or younger compared with other kids without the devices. According to researchers, 63% of the study's participants owned a smartphone. These are kids 12 years old. 66% owned a smartphone, and the median age they received them was 11 years old. Using that data, researchers determined that younger children had greater risks than older participants of poor sleep or obesity linked to smartphone ownership, with increasingly worse health outcomes reported for kids the younger they were when they received their first smartphone. Ron Barzilay, the lead author of the study and a lead psychiatrist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, said, quote, "We didn't even look at what the kids did on the phone. We basically asked one simple question. Does the mere factor of owning your own smartphone at this age range have anything to do with health outcomes?" And apparently, at least according to this study, the answer is yes. So obviously there's going to be a lot more research done to find out what's going on here. Is it because they're so sedentary, you think?
Part of it, yes.
I think a lot of parents are struggling with.
Real problem.
What do you do with kids who, their peers all have phones, everybody's messaging each other, and if your kid doesn't have a phone, they're out of it.
But the parents have phones too. And the parents are subject to the same addiction problems as the children are.
Okay, but we're talking about peer pressure for a 10-year-old where all of her friends are texting.
Hey, we've got grandchildren. Same problem. Same problem.
I don't know how you'd solve that problem.
Okay, so now let's talk about something else in our society.
Okay.
Tattoos.
Oh, boy.
It's amazing when you're watching football players. I have to admit, I do watch a little bit of football.
Any sport, really.
They're just covered.
Yeah.
Covered. And in fact, we have actually covered this subject before.
We did an article on tattoos a while ago about the harmful impacts of the ink, right?
But new research is showing that tattoo pigments don't just stay in one place. They migrate into lymph nodes, triggering months of inflammation and change how the body responds to different kinds of vaccines. In a recent study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, researchers investigated the journey of tattoo ink through the lymphatic system as it accumulates in lymph nodes and affects immune cells. The researchers demonstrated that tattoo ink rapidly drains to lymph nodes where macrophages, which are white blood cells that fight off invaders, take it up and often die as a result, triggering persistent inflammation for months, as well as reduced immunity to mRNA vaccines.
That's the COVID vaccine, right? The mRNA?
Well, that's a type of vaccine, mRNA. Yeah. Tattooing has become highly popular around the world, particularly among younger populations, with around 20% of people globally and over 30% in the United States having at least one tattoo.
Really?
The process introduces pigments deep into the dermis through repeated needle penetration. Because these pigments are designed to be insoluble and long-lasting, they often contain complex mixtures of binders, solvents, and industrial colorants.
Just what you want floating around in your body, right? Holy cow.
While black tattoos typically use carbon black, colored inks commonly contain pigments originally designed for industrial applications such as in plastics and paints. Despite widespread use, tattoo inks are far less regulated than pharmaceuticals or other substances intentionally introduced into the body.
Sure.
But you are introducing these into the body, but they're not regulated. And although some toxicology data exist for individual ingredients, little is known about how inks behave inside living systems, especially over the long term.
I think people think that a tattoo basically stays where it is. It's permanent and it doesn't go anywhere. But now we're understanding
the inks migrate.
They travel through the lymph system.
They migrate to lymph nodes.
That's crazy.
Nobody thinks about the long-term impacts.
No.
At all, and nobody talks about it. You walk into a tattoo parlor, you think you have a little sign that says doing this. You're introducing carbon black colored inks, that are designed for industrial applications in paints and plastics, but they're going into your body, and it might actually wind up in your lymph nodes.
Yeah, I don't think people are going to. That's not going to happen.
No, you don't have those warning signs.
Thanks, Patti.
You're welcome. Farming is hard work, really hard. Working outside in the heat and the cold, at the mercy of nature, hoping that the things you planted and the animals you care for will thrive, and worrying that all your hard work and investment could be ruined by floods, droughts, or storms. Farmers are often overlooked when we think about the food we put on the table, but of course, they are an indispensable part of our food system. And while a lot of processed food comes from giant agribusinesses that grow commodity crops on giant tracts of land, a lot of our food comes from small farms. Family farms where good people put in long hours in tough conditions to grow the food for the rest of us.
Jennifer Fahy is the Communications Director for Farm Aid, the nonprofit advocacy group founded back in 1985 by Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp, who organized the first Farm Aid concert to raise awareness about the loss of family farms and to raise funds to keep farm families on the land. Patti and I spoke with Jennifer earlier this week, and we started our conversation talking about how the mission of preserving family farms is as important today as it was 40 years ago. Here's our conversation with Jennifer Fahy.
That is the root of Farm Aid, really. Farm aid started in a time of crisis. Farmers were being pushed off the land. That was really, as it turns out, a government push. There were similar conditions to what we're hearing today about this government efficiency and wanting to make sure that no funding is, misspent representing farms that weren't out there earning money and paying the government back on their loans every year. So the Reagan administration really pushed out those farmers, which opened the door to this massive consolidation that we see now in our food and farm system and made it possible for corporations to really gain that foothold that they have in conquering our food and farm system. I mentioned that Farm Aid wasn't intended to be an ongoing organization, but shortly after the farm crisis settled down a bit, we started hearing from farmers in places like Illinois and Missouri and Iowa that these massive livestock facilities were opening. And they were raising hogs, and they were raising so many hogs that the price of pork just plummeted. And all these independent producers who were raising their hogs like nature intended, outdoors, where they could be pigs instead of in these massive confined facilities. They couldn't compete anymore. And so Farm Aid kind of moved into this next phase of advocating against that style of livestock agriculture and corporate controlled centrality in our food system. That is still a fight today.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about the three phases of Farm Aid, I think about this time of crisis, which started the organization. We moved into this fight against factory farms. And then thankfully, there was a third wave in about the time I started at Farm Aid in the early 2000s of people really being concerned about their food and how it's grown and who grows it. We call that the good food movement. And that, at the time that I started, it was discussed as like this trend, this fad that was happening. And I'm really grateful to say that it's still with us and still growing, I think. And yet we continue to have to fight the livestock and corporate power in general all across the farm system. And of course, now we find ourselves in a time of crisis again.
What does that look like when you say we're fighting against it? Is that working in Washington? Is that taking other steps? Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a little bit of everything. So it really does start with the grassroots. It was farmers on the front lines who called our attention to it in the first place. They began organizing and working in their states to help put in some legislation and restrictions and regulation that would help to balance the playing field. So one of those organizations is in Missouri. It's called Missouri Rural Action Center. And they started organizing hog farmers. And Willie Nelson went and played at a very large protest. All these farmers from across the Midwest came and called attention at Premium Standard Farms, which was a corporate-owned hog farm, and called attention to what was happening. And Willie showed up and played some tunes. That's how our artists support farmers.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways. So we make grants to this day to organizations like Missouri Rural Crisis, which, by the way, didn't just become an organization that was fighting something, but also realized we've got to offer the alternative. And so they are a cooperative of pig farmers who are raising their hogs without antibiotics outdoors in the way that we all want our food to be raised. And it's called Patchwork Family Farms. And we serve their wonderful pork at our annual festival event. So it's that kind of full circle.
I see. Yeah.
When you say, what is a farm? So I'm envisioning your protest being against these huge factory farms. I mean, they don't even look like farms.
Right.
Right? I mean, when you see them, especially for an aerial photograph of them, it's like, yeah, where are we?
Yeah, exactly. And they're secrets, right? You can't gain access to them. And now we have laws on the books that make it illegal for people to try to gain access. So we've had a lot of whistleblowers go in and pose as employees of those places. And a lot of people are involved in that kind of work on the animal welfare side of the equation,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is really important to Farm Aid as well. But we really come at it from a human standpoint. And what are these kinds of agricultural systems doing to farmers, real people on the land who are stewarding our soil and water? What are they doing to our water and our air? What are they doing to the quality of the life that people in those rural communities can live? We know the model of corporate agriculture, but also now, energy development and all of these other areas, now server farms, and how we're doing AI. It all goes into rural communities and extracts the value, gives nothing back to the rural communities except the bad side effects. So a lot of work still to do for sure.
So, talk to us a little bit about what you have seen from the public and why there has been this huge movement to know where our food is grown.
Yeah.
And who's growing it, and how they're growing it, and how they're transporting it, and how they're refrigerating it before it gets here. I mean, people over, a couple of decades now are really, really concerned about their food quality.
Yeah, and for those who are in that boat already, they come at it from different angles. There are people who are concerned about the animal welfare, people who are concerned about rural communities, climate change, soil, water, environment,
Pesticides.
pesticides. Yes, yeah. And we see that becoming more and more a conversation in agricultural circles, of course, because farmers often have a higher incidence of cancer and other diseases caused by the pesticides that they're usually applying. Um, so many people come from many different ways, and Farm Aid has this incredible opportunity via the culture and the music that we can bring people in just who are Willie Nelson fans or Neil Young fans. And we call our event a festival because it goes beyond the music. We incorporate hands-on interactive experiences. So people have what we hope is a transformative experience at the festival. And they take that knowledge, they take that connection, they take that skill home with them and put it to work.
I know that Farm Aid kind of got started at a time when family farms were increasingly in danger and families were losing their farms. And has that turned around now? Are we seeing a turnaround in that situation?
Well, if you had asked me a year ago, I'd say yes. Unfortunately, since January 20th, 2025, we have moved back into a time of crisis with all the new policies of this current administration. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy before then either.
So, can you be specific about
Yeah.
those policies?
Sure.
Which policies that have been put in place are really dragging this back?
Yeah. So, I mean, immediately in January, the federal funding freeze really impacted a lot of farmers, particularly small farmers. There is a glimmer of silver lining that came out of the COVID pandemic, which is that suddenly the federal government saw that they could create these programs that, were not just a subsidy program to, protect farmers in the case of major commodity market failures, but also to put funds into local communities so that food banks and schools and other institutional buyers could have a little extra funding to go out and purchase from local farms. And the reason that that happened during COVID is because the giant food system failed us. We went into the grocery stores and they were empty.
Right.
Most of us went to the farmers market and, it was March. So in the Northeast where we all are, the pickings were slim. We had a lot of storage crops and cold weather greens at that time. But there was this resurgence then of people going to the farmers market and recognizing that, hey, these local farmers are here for us. They're still keeping things moving. Their supply chain didn't break, and we're part of it. And the federal government saw that too and put this funding into these local food promotion programs and local food for schools programs so that schools, food banks, hospitals, nursing homes, all these institutional buyers could put that money locally, buy really good, healthy food. Those programs were set to expire at some point, but then when President Trump came into office, he slashed them. No value there, throw it out the window. And I just keep thinking, gosh, if we could have let it go to the point of maybe it would have expired naturally, I think that we all would have said, look at the value of this program. Like, not only is it putting good food onto the tables of people who need that access, but it's also supporting our farmers and creating new markets for them. They can maybe have better margins and actually, have a little bit to invest in improving their farm, improving their production methods, expanding their markets, maybe putting some money away for retirement or sending their kids to college. But anyway, those programs unfortunately were canceled. And, I just spent some time with farmers on the road last week, and they're all still impacted by it and still kind of figuring out like how do we fill that gap? It's because they had all grown and planned to grow for that season the food to fulfill those markets. Tariffs are another big one. Of course, those are impacting a lot of large scale growers, but I have to say, especially traveling across the Midwest this summer for our annual festival, you can't just say, oh, they're growing wheat or they're growing corn and soy, and so they're not small farmers. Many of them are small farmers, and they're families who've had this farm in their legacy, and the weight of it is on their shoulders. And now with the tariffs and the lost markets, they're struggling with the potentiality of losing that farm and having it be on their watch. But, the small farms are also impacted by tariffs because we've also seen the tariffs on, for instance, animal feed and fertilizer coming from Canada. And farmers were already dealing with a rise in costs for energy and equipment and feed and fertilizer. So, I think it's just been one thing after another for farmers this year. I'm sure I'm forgetting things. Oh, renewable energy.
Yeah.
There were these incredible, under the Green New Deal, there were these incredible new incentives for farmers to put renewable energy projects on their farm. And then those got canceled. And a lot of them are on the hook for, they had already been partially installed. Most of these programs, the farmer has to do the work first and then gets reimbursed.
Yeah.
So a lot of farmers were on the hook for that. And we had been moving to something the food movement has talked about for so long, which is how do we build climate resiliency into these farms? And how do we make sure that that cost, which benefits all of us, it doesn't just benefit the farmer, but it benefits our entire climate and our food system. How do we make sure that's not just on the shoulders of the farmers? So, yeah, a lot has been lost. And it does feel that, of course, bankruptcies are going up for farmers. And there had been, thanks to COVID, which is not a great expression. I shouldn't say it that. But because of
COVID, yeah.
there were moratoriums put on place and programs put in place so that farmers could have loan servicing to make sure that if they did come into hard times because of the COVID pandemic, they would not lose their farm. And those moratoriums were also removed this year. And so now we don't have those protections for farmers, and we're beginning to see those bankruptcy rates creep up again. So, yeah, it's definitely hard times out there for farmers again.
What's happening with this immigration policy and farms? That's really important to, to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's another big doozy that has impacted farmers this year. And the inaction before this new presidency by Congress to come up with any solution for farm workers to have a visa to come and work. We have this H-2A program that is very seasonal and it works for certain crops. Here in New England, we have dairies and they require workers for a whole year. This is not seasonal work. And many farmers are forced to rely on workers who are not on that program. And their workers are living in fear right now if they're even still here on the farm. And so there has to be a solution because, the recognition needs to be made that our food system does rely on immigrants. And, until I guess we're not going to learn that until we don't have food because we don't have the workers to put that food on the table.
So, Jennifer, are you optimistic about the future then? I understand we're going through a rough patch and I know we're going to lose some of our farms.
Yeah.
We've got these two things happening at the same time. We got the federal government saying, oh, we don't need this program. And yet we have this tremendous food movement where people are so concerned about where their food comes from and how it's grown.
I am optimistic. I think we're in a blip right now. I hope we're in a blip in terms of the slashing of these really good programs. I know that there are really good people in the federal government who believe in these programs and who get that this is not just about the financial bottom line. It's that triple bottom line. Like, how are we taking care of people? How are we benefiting our local community and making sure that, people have the opportunity to thrive and people have the opportunity to innovate? I think most people here in this country do think about those things. And so I do have a lot of optimism, particularly, like looking beyond the federal government, which does, dictate so much of our food and farm policy. But there's so much opportunity too at the state level and at local community levels. And thankfully, people still want to become farmers. You know, we have a hotline, which I mentioned, and a lot of the folks who call are calling in crisis, or at least not good times, and they're looking for some support. But about half the calls come from people who want to get involved in farming, and they're young or they're not so young. You know, thankfully, a lot of them are young because the average age of farmers is 58 and rising every year. And so we've got to be bringing more new young farmers in. But anyone who wants to go into agriculture and do things differently is so needed. And they have great ideas, and they have ideas for doing, you know, not only the growing differently, but also the marketing and the distribution. And, you know, I think there's more focus on how do we do better all together? You know, can we farm cooperatively?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm gonna throw just a couple of environmental health questions out at you. One is, how many small farms have actually been shut down because their land has been contaminated with biosolids? Number two, the Trump administration through its EPA has just now approved the 5th pesticide that has PFAS in it for use on wheat, corn, and soybeans, of course, which is, you know, these are our crops that we use for ultra processed foods as well as animal feed. So where's Farm Aid on fighting back against, you know, I mean, I understand that farmers who are really struggling financially would love to have cheap fertilizer, you know, from, you know, Chicago or, you know, Minneapolis, their sewage treatment plants, right? What are we doing about that?
Yeah. We heard from farmers in Maine a number of years ago when they were beginning to discover that their land had been contaminated.
Forever.
Yeah, forever, or at least, you know, with remediation, a very long time. I was just hearing about this incredible tool for remediation of PFAS. It's a cover crop. Farmers are experimenting with that.
Yeah,
So
I bet they are.
to do those kinds of things. But anyway, yes, we heard from a number of farmers through the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. They reached out and said, we've got a number of farms, they've been shut down. I don't know the exact number that have been permanently shut down. I do know there were farms in Maine. I think that's where it first started. And then they started finding some in Michigan as well, and New York. These weren't necessarily farmers who were looking to, you know, fertilize on the cheap. They had been told that this was safe, and many of them did it out of a compulsion to like reuse, recycle, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And unfortunately, they were misled, and now they're dealing with that outcome of not being able to use the land until it is remediated, which is not an option when you're running a farm business. You can't just put things on hold and wait it out. The PFAS in the pesticides that are newly approved is like, how are we possibly going down this road? We know what these chemicals do to us. There have been lawsuits. There have been deaths documented. I mean, complete and utter environmental desecration, and yet we're still going down the same road for corporate profit. I mean, this is a big focus of what we do. Like, why would we possibly operate in a system that way simply to cause, you know, shareholders and billionaires to make more money? It's insanity, and it's not the way that we should be running a country or a food system. And so helping to spread the news of that insanity and helping to get people activated and energized and active is part of the work that we do.
Jennifer Fahy, Communications Director for Farm Aid, the nonprofit organization founded back in 1985 by Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp. You can learn more about Farm Aid at the organization's website, farmaid.org. You'll find links to Farm Aid and all the news we talked about on the show today at our program website, greenstreetnews.org, where you'll also find contact information if you want to ask us questions or comment on the show. That's going to do it for this edition of Green Street. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of the show. Thanks for listening.